All right, so I've had the Nikon Z8 for a week now, and I've been going through the settings, getting it all set up for what we're gonna be using it for. Really happy with it. I've already used it a few times. I'm using it right now. And yeah, really happy with it. But I've been wondering what really makes it different from the Z9. Obviously, there's the obvious answers to that. But now that I have both of them, I'm curious to really kind of dive in deeper and see if there's little things that I can pick up on that really shows what the difference is. And I also want to just say that this video is kind of directed towards anybody that is considering purchasing either of these cameras at this point and trying to decide between the two of them. So the differences that I'm pointing out is kind of with that in mind. Anyone is free to watch it, but just so you know, that's sort of where I'm coming at with all this. So let's first talk about the physical bodies themselves. Obviously the Z9 is a pro body. This gives you the advantage of being able to easily and comfortably be able to switch to the vertical position. Let me tell you, holding it like this with a long lens is not fun. So the Z8 does offer a battery grip that you can attach that essentially makes it look like this. You don't get all the same buttons and functions, but you do end up getting more battery life, because that's another advantage to having the vertical grip. You know, the Z9 comes with this massive, it's the ENEL18D battery, 3,300 milliamp hours, so delivers a lot of power. And what's interesting is the cameras are so similar that the Z8's drawing very similar power demands that the Z9 does, you know, because if you're recording in the same formats and the same resolutions and frame rates and stuff, they're the same. So, right, if you have the smaller battery that the Z8 comes with, which is the ENEL15 Charlie, and it looks like this, right? So this is the Z6 battery that came with my Z6, and this is the ENEL15B battery. And so this is 1900 milliamp hours. The Charlie one is 2280 milliamp hours. Got some notes here to help me stay on track. So it does have more than the Z6 one, and it's actually black in color. This one's gray, so if you have some of these sitting around and then you get Z8 batteries, you can quickly tell the difference, even though you can actually interchange. They're the same form factor, so you know, if you have these, you can use them in your Z8. But anyways, so where was I? Oh yeah, so if you get the vertical grip, you can put two of those Charlie batteries, right? The black ones that come with the Z8, you can get another one, and now your grip can hold two of those and you get more battery life, and you actually end up getting 4,560 milliamp hours, which is over 1,000 more than you do with the Z9. And at that point, they're very similar in size. They both weigh about 3 pounds at that point. The Z8 weighs 2 pounds straight out of the box, the way that it comes. So those are all just numbers and things that you might want to consider when it comes to the vertical grip difference. You can get it that way, like you can end up kind of getting the Z8 to be that way, and you're still going to be less, right? It ends up being an extra $423 to get the grip and a second battery. So that puts you at 4,000, just on around 4,500 bucks, which is still $1,000 cheaper than the Z9. So just something to consider. But yeah, outside of that, the differences are pretty minor. You get an additional function button here on the Z9 that you can hit with your ring finger if you're shooting horizontally, or you can hit it with your middle finger if you're shooting vertically, so it is nice to have that. When you come over to the port side, very, very similar. The only difference is that the Z9 has a dedicated Ethernet port, and the only has one USB-C port. But they both have full-size HDMI and headphone and mic jacks, as you would imagine. And then if the Ethernet port is kind of something that you're concerned about for whatever reason, you can get a USB-C to Ethernet like adapter dongle or whatever they're called, and then still get that same functionality for the most part. So just something else to consider, I suppose. They both get this additional function button that's kind of underneath the ports here, so that's nice. And they both have the 10-pin connector. I use that for the wireless remote photography. So my little shutter release, and so it might have some other things you can plug into it, but that's what I use it for, and they both have it. But the Z9 does come with this flash sync terminal. I actually had no idea what that was. I had to look it up for this video, so I can tell you that I have no experience using it or really whatnot, but it has to do with flash. So if flash stuff is something that you need, or you know what that is and whatnot, then you're stuck with the Z9 because the Z8 does not have that. So anyways, come to the top, try to move along here. Everything's the same as you can see up here. You have the same buttons over here on the left side of the viewfinder, and same stuff on the right side. But if we kind of switch to the back side now, and then you look up at the buttons on this dial that's up by the viewfinder, this is what allows you on the Z9, you can just quickly move this dial and move through the release mode selectors. So whether you want a single shot, the low continuous, high continuous, the 60 frames per second, 120 frames per second for photos, which is insane. Ugh. Sorry about that. Had an Amber Alert going off on my phone over there. Anyways, so this this release mode dial is nice to have on the Z9. On the Z8, you end up just having to hold the button on the top and then use your aperture and shutter dials to switch through them. But again, just a nice little upgrade, but not something that's really necessary for a lot of people. But anyways, so if you look at the back of the cameras, they are identical. There's nothing different about them other than the buttons that you get on the Z9 because of the integrated vertical grip. The screens are the same, they flip out the same, both horizontally and vertically, so that's nice. Yeah, really not anything different here. And if you come over here to the memory card side, real quick, the Z9 does come with this lock ability with the Kensington locks. So if you wanted to lock it up with a cable, so someone can't just walk up and walk away with it. So if you're using the camera in some format where you're leaving it unattended, that is something that the Z9 offers that the Z8 does not. So another little thing where if that's necessary for you, then you're stuck with the Z9. So anyways, that pretty much sums up the physical body, right? And that's just something you'll have to decide if that's a make it or break it for you. But where things start to take a turn and is not changeable once you buy the cameras is the memory card slots themselves. The Z9 comes with the dual CF Express Type B, whereas the Z8 comes with one CF Express Type B slot and one SD card slot. Now, that might not seem like a big deal to most people, and in fact, I think it is part of the reason that the Z8 is cheaper, and I think it makes the camera more approachable and obtainable, and you don't necessarily have to invest into the high-end CF Express Type B cards right away. Why is this relevant? Well, I'll give you a couple examples here in a second, but I'd like to just read a couple of things from the Z8 reference guide, actually, and I'll put it on the screen so you can feel free to pause and read it. But I'm gonna go ahead and read a couple things that I just want to point out real quick. So as you can see, each video can be up to 125 minutes in length, or the cameras display that as 2 hours and 5 minutes, but it's the same thing. So on the Z8, it doesn't matter if you're using an SD card or XQD or CF Express Type B, you still get the same record limits. But if you jump down here to about middle of it, it says depending on the memory card write speed, shooting may end before the maximum length is reached. And it goes on to say that if the video cannot be recorded, the video cannot be recorded to SD memory cards or to XQD memory cards with a capacity of 32 gigs or less if you're going to be shooting in either of the RAW formats. Also, it doesn't matter what kind of card you're using, they recommend that a maximum data transfer rate of at least 250 megabytes a second and that if you're going to be shooting in one of the RAW formats, that they recommend using the CF Express format or their CF Express Type B cards. Now, I bring that up because there are certain shooting situations where, depending on the card you're using, how fast those data rates, those write speeds are, you could end up in a bottleneck situation. And I'll kind of give two examples, one for video, one for photo, of actually how that could affect you. I was using the Z9 to film a wedding last year, and in the middle of the ceremony, which is not a do-overable, right? You got one shot to capture it. It was very hot, it was like 104 degrees. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was terrible. But anyways, the camera itself did not shut down. It didn't overheat. But anyways, that didn't even happen. But it was odd. It told me that the card itself was getting hot, right? And I'm shooting on a pro grade Cobalt 650 gig card, read write speeds, well over 1500 megabytes, right? I was shooting in ProRes HQ 422 and 4K 60. And so that's a lot of data, right? Of course it's gonna get hot. But anyways, so I was able to switch and just continued recording to my second card. Didn't have to change anything. If I'd been recording with the Z8, that same thing happened and I didn't have a fast enough SD card in there, I would have had to have potentially changed settings to be able to start recording on the S8, right? I might not have been able to maintain that 4K 60 in ProRes functionality. And so you don't really want that to happen in those kind of situations. So you might think, oh, it has all the same video specs as the Z9. It does. But that only applies if you're shooting to the CF Express memory card, right? As soon as you have to shoot to the SD card, you're gonna lose some of that. So it's not the same across the board. So for most people, that's not gonna be an issue, but consider it if that's something that you are purchasing the Z8 for. Now, if we talk about photos, both of them have the 45 megapixel sensor, right? And both of them have the same release modes, right? But like I just mentioned, a big reason that people like having the dual cards is because they want the redundancy. So if something happens to one of the cards, they have an equal backup, right? You're getting the same thing on both cards. And these cameras can both do that. The thing is, if you're shooting 20 frames per second on a 45 megapixel resolution, right? That's the full sensor. If you're shooting to 2 CF Express Type B cards, you're gonna have the same limitations, right? It's gonna stop shooting at the same time because basically you'll hear it, right, firing off, and then it'll start going tut, 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 tut. It'll slow down, right? So in the Z9, if you have the same 2 cards, that'll happen at the same time, right? But if you're on an SD card, even the fastest SD cards are not as fast as CF Express cards. So that SD card is gonna slow down your high frames per second shooting faster on the Z8 because it's the SD card than the Z9 because you have 2, right? I know I keep repeating myself, but I'm hoping that makes sense. So having the same cards you're gonna want that if you're in paid work, if you're shooting sports, wildlife, action shots, right? And someone's paying you to do that. You don't want your camera to be bottlenecked by the card. Now, it's up to you to decide whether that's important or not, or how you're gonna be using it. But those are the differences. That's the thing, and no firmware update's gonna change how fast that SD card slot can operate at, right? That's just a different type of technology. So you just need to keep that in mind if you're still going back and forth between these 2 cameras, because that is really the only difference. Other than that, inside they have all the same shooting modes, the settings are pretty much the same. The Z8 offers airplane autofocus detect. I don't really know why. The Z9 has had no problem locking onto airplanes, but that is a specific autofocus detect mode that you can pick on the Z8, so I don't know. But that's all firmware based, right? The Z9 has this auto capture thing that showed up in the latest firmware update, but yeah, again, and they said the Z8 was gonna get it, and then they kind of took it away. That's been kind of a whole weird thing, I don't know. But the Z8 still might end up getting something like that, and that's also a very niche usage type feature. But again, if that's something that you want right now, the Z9 is what has that, and the Z8 does not. All right, that sums up the differences for the most part that I have found so far. And really, to recommend the Z9 to someone, it would have to be based on the fact that they're gonna be in those types of shooting situations where the SD card either is guaranteed to be problematic or could end up being problematic for whatever you're shooting. But that's really the only way that I could recommend the Z9 at this point, is if the memory cards is the thing that's gonna end up being the deciding factor. With that said, why is the price different then? Is the memory card situation itself worth that difference? That's up for you to decide, but I think there's two reasons that the Z8 is so much cheaper. And the first has got to be production. I think that making the Z9 itself, the physical body and the other components and stuff that's in it, I think that that alone attributes to quite a bit of the price difference. But I think the other area, or the other reason it's so much cheaper, is because it's for the market. It's for that price point. It's because that $4,000 price point is a competitive market. And I think that when you look on paper, I mean, the Z8, at $4,000, the other cameras that are that same price, it's not even close, right? The features and what the Z8 is able to do, not even funny. So I think that they're really trying to attack that price point, and that the Z9 Mark II, whenever, if that's what it's gonna be called or whatever, but whenever it comes out, will be a powerhouse camera, just like the Z9 was. And so I know it's a little bit weird that they made this decision, and I'm not gonna pretend to act like I know why they made the Z8 so similar to the Z9. Really not a lot of difference. But I do think that's why the Z8 is a bit cheaper. And I'm sure some of those other things that I've covered in this video. With that, I hope you found this helpful. As always, if you have any additional questions or any specific videos or topics or anything that you would like me to cover, please feel free to reach out or leave a comment. I love making videos, but I would love to be able to make videos that you guys are actually interested in watching, not just me rambling on about things. Yeah. I appreciate you watching. I hope you found it helpful, and until the next one, see ya.